I want to begin by asking you a question. It is a question that perhaps, in the quiet hours of the night, has haunted you as well. When you look back at the defining moments of your youth, specifically that final, crescendoing night of high school, the prom, what is it that actually remains? Is it the glossy, high-resolution photographs stored in a cloud server? Is it the echo of laughter from friends who swore they would stay in touch forever? Is it the thumping bass of the music that vibrated through the floorboards? Or is it something else entirely? Is it a feeling, a specific, visceral sensation that refuses to be washed away, even as the years pile up like fallen leaves? I stood there, frozen in the absolute center of the gymnasium. The space, usually smelling of floor wax and old rubber, had been transformed into a shimmering cavern of artificial starlight. I was surrounded by the aggressive twinkle of 1,000 fairy lights draped from the basketball hoops, the rustle of taffeta and silk, and the blinding, strobe-like flashes of cameras. Every face around me was stretched into a smile. Everyone was performing the same desperate ritual, trying to capture, preserve, and manufacture the best night of our lives. And then there was me. I was trying to smile. I was trying to mimic the joy I saw reflected in the eyes of my classmates. But inside the hollow cage of my ribs, a darkness was blooming. It wasn't just sadness, it was a living, breathing entity. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt that your smile is nothing more than a porcelain mask, cold and heavy, glued to your skin? And beneath that mask there is a rising tide of panic, a scream clawing its way up your throat, threatening to shatter the porcelain and expose the wreckage underneath. In that precise moment, amidst the perfume and the cheap cologne and the body heat, I realized a terrifying truth. The photograph they were about to take, the one that would end up in yearbooks and on mantelpieces, would never belong to me. Because I was not there, the real me, the terrified girl drowning in plain sight, would not be captured by the lens. The camera would only catch the shell, the hollow effigy I had constructed for the benefit of others. I ask myself this often. Why are we so desperately addicted to the appearance of happiness, even when a hurricane is tearing us apart from the inside out? Why are we so terrified to show the world the cracks in our armor? Perhaps it is because we have been conditioned since childhood. We are taught that prom is a celebration, a victory lap, and at a celebration, tears are a violation of a social contract. You are not allowed to ruin the mood. But what if the tears are the only honest thing in the room? What if the breaking point is the only moment of truth? I remember the physical sensation of that moment with agonizing clarity. My heart was not just beating, it was battering against my chest wall, a trapped bird throwing itself against the bars. I remember the tremors starting in my fingertips, subtle at first, then uncontrollable. I tried to clasp my hands behind my back, locking my fingers together until the knuckles turned white, praying no one would see the vibration. I remember the photographer. He was a large man with a booming voice that cut through the music. "Everybody squeeze in! Closer! Big smiles, everyone!" His command felt like a physical blow. Closer, the walls of human bodies pressed in. Smile, the command to lie. In that split second, the world around me began to dissolve. The edges of my vision blurred into static. The sounds of the party warped into a low, menacing roar. Have you ever felt that? The sensation that every single pair of eyes in a crowded room has suddenly locked onto you. That they can see through your clothes, through your skin, right into the shivering core of your anxiety. It is a feeling that paralyzes you. It strips you naked. It turns you into an alien species standing among people who, just hours ago, called themselves your friends. So there I stood, in the gymnasium of a small American town, under banners that screamed Class of 2023 in glitter and gold. The music was loud, a pop anthem about living forever, but I could no longer hear the melody. I could only hear the ragged, desperate sound of my own breath, shallow and fast, struggling to pull oxygen from air that felt too thick to inhale. I knew, with the certainty of a prophecy, that if I stayed there for one single second longer, I would shatter. I would collapse on that polished floor and ruin everything. But the social pressure was an iron weight. Can you simply run away from prom? Is it permissible to vanish from the photograph that is supposed to be the historical record of your joy? And yet, against all logic, against all social conditioning, I ran. This is not a story about a magical evening. This is a story about a photograph that does not exist. It is a story about how a panic attack can steal a moment that was promised to be golden. It is about how I lost myself in a crowd of hundreds, and how I had to go into the silence to find myself again. But before I tell you exactly how the night unraveled, I want to ask you to consider, what does a photograph mean to you? Is it a vessel for memory, or is it an illusion we sell to ourselves? Is it the truth, or is it the mask? My story begins with the realization that sometimes a photograph can be empty. Because real life, the messy, painful, beautiful reality, is what happens when the shutter is closed. If you are ready, I will tell you how I arrived at that precipice. I will tell you how my panic attacks became woven into the fabric of my identity. How I fought a war against my own nervous system and lost. And how, one night, amidst the balloons and the bass, I realized that losing might just be the first step toward winning. My name is Jessica. I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio, a place where the horizon is flat and filled with cornfields, and where life moved with a rhythmic, predictable cadence. It was the kind of town where people didn't just live, they subsided in a comfortable continuity. The streets were lined with old maples, the houses were variations of the same sensible architecture, and the high school sat like a fortress in the center of it all, the gravitational center of our universe. In a place like that, anonymity is impossible. Everyone knew your parents, your grades, and who you dated. It seemed like an environment where it would be impossible to get lost. But I managed to get lost. I got lost inside the labyrinth of my own mind. From the time I was a little girl, I was the definition of compliant. I was the girl who colored inside the lines, literally and metaphorically. I was the good kid. My report cards were flawless rows of A's. I had a polite smile ready for every adult I passed in the grocery store. I joined the clubs. I volunteered. I showed up. Teachers adored me because I made their jobs easy. My parents beamed with pride, telling their friends how low maintenance Jessica was. My friends considered me the rock, the reliable one, the listener, the steady hand. But no one saw what was happening behind the closed white-painted door of my bedroom. No one saw the nights I spent staring at the ceiling, feeling a weight on my chest that had no name. The cracks started to appear in middle school. I remember the very first time the shadow touched me. I was sitting in 7th grade algebra. The room smelled of chalk dust and floor cleaner. The teacher was droning on about variables, his voice a monotonous hum. Sunlight was streaming through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. And then, without warning, the floor seemed to drop out from under me. My heart didn't just speed up, it began to hammer with a violence that shook my entire body. My palms instantly became slick with cold sweat, my throat constricted, as if an invisible hand were tightening around my windpipe. I stared at the chalkboard, but the numbers began to swim and dissolve. A single, terrifying thought flashed through my brain. I am dying. This is it. I am dying right here in math class. I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles turning white, waiting for the darkness to take me. But it didn't. After 5 or 6 eternal minutes, the way receded, the heart rate slowed, the air returned to my lungs. The teacher was still talking about variables. The dust motes were still dancing. The world hadn't ended. I sat there, stunned, trembling internally, acting as if nothing had happened. At first I rationalized it. I told myself I was just tired. Maybe I hadn't eaten enough breakfast. Maybe it was the flu. But the episodes didn't stop. They became a recurring glitch in my reality. They happened in the most mundane places. I would be standing in line at the supermarket, watching the cashier scan items, and suddenly the beep of the scanner would sound like a siren, and the walls would start to lean in. They happened at school assemblies, the sheer volume of bodies pressing against me, triggering a flight response so primal it made me dizzy. They happened in the safety of my own kitchen, sitting at the table with a bowl of cereal, when a sudden wave of doom would wash over me, telling me that something terrible was imminent. Panic became an uninvited guest who had moved into my house and refused to leave. I became an expert at concealment. I told no one, not a soul. How do you explain to your teenage friends, whose biggest worries are crushes and football games, that you are terrified of your own heartbeat? How do you look your parents in the eye, parents who see you as their perfect, capable daughter, and admit that you feel like you are losing your mind? I was paralyzed by the fear of being seen as weak. In my town, you were tough. You just got on with it. By the time I reached high school, anxiety was no longer an event, it was the atmosphere I breathed. I learned to bifurcate my existence. Externally, I was Jessica, the high achiever, the girl with the bright laugh and the organized planner. Internally, I was a ship, constantly taking on water, bailing furiously just to stay afloat. School events were the hardest. The noise, the expectations, the sheer density of human interaction, it all acted as an accelerant for my anxiety. I remember a choir concert in my junior year. I had a short solo, just 4 measures. As I stood on the risers, waiting for my cue, the panic hit. My vision tunneled. My legs felt like gelatin. I couldn't draw a full breath. But when the conductor pointed at me, I opened my mouth and sang. The notes came out clear and true, while inside, I was screaming. And then, the calendar turned toward graduation, and the inevitable spectre of prom loomed. The anticipation was suffocating. For months, it was the only topic of conversation. "It's going to be the best night of your life," everyone said. It was a mantra. A command. The girls analyzed color palettes and necklines. The boys postured about limousines and after-parties. I nodded along. I smiled. I participated. But my internal monologue was a broken record of fear. Can I survive the crowd? Can I handle the noise? Can I keep the mask on for 5 hours straight? Will I shatter in front of everyone? I went shopping for a dress. I chose a pale blue gown, off-the-shoulder, delicate chiffon. Standing in the dressing room mirror, under the harsh fluorescent lights, I looked like a princess. It was beautiful. But, as I stared at my reflection, a cold thought wormed its way in. What if I ruin this dress? What if I have an attack and fall? What if the memory attached to this beautiful silk is one of humiliation? Every day that ticked by on the calendar brought a rising tide of nausea. I tried to use logic. I tried to tell myself, it's just a dance, Jessica. It's just music and friends. But anxiety doesn't listen to logic. It listens to fear. I knew deep down that I was walking toward a test I hadn't studied for. And yet, I went. I had to go. In a small town, skipping prom is a statement. It's an admission of defect. I went because it was the symbol of completion. It was the moment that was supposed to seal our childhood in amber. But memory is a tricky thing. It doesn't always keep what we want it to keep. I am telling you all this context so you understand my story did not begin the moment I stepped into the gym. It began years ago, in quiet rooms and crowded hallways. My panic attacks were my shadow, my constant companion. Prom was simply the stage where the shadow finally stepped into the spotlight. I was the girl who tried to be perfect, but inside, I was already broken, and nobody saw it. Now you know who I am. Now you understand that for me, prom wasn't a party. It was an exam, a survival exam, and I want to show you exactly how I failed it. I can pinpoint the exact era when my panic attacks shifted. They stopped being sporadic thunderstorms, rare, violent, but passing, and transformed into a persistent climate. They began to bleed into the mundane fabric of my daily existence, stalking me like a predator that had caught my scent. Before the shift, I could dismiss the episodes. I could blame a sleepless night, a difficult exam, or too much caffeine. But then came the day in the cafeteria. It was a Wednesday, the middle of the semester. I was standing in the lunch line, holding a plastic tray still damp from the dishwasher. The cafeteria was a cavern of noise, the clattering of silverware, the shouting of hundreds of teenagers, the screech of chair legs on linoleum. It was the usual chaos. Suddenly, the acoustics of the room changed. The noise didn't just get louder, it became physical. It felt like the air pressure in the room had dropped. The walls, painted that institutional beige, seemed to physically inch closer, compressing the space. My heart abandoned its rhythm and began to flutter wildly, a hummingbird trapped in a box. I looked down at my tray. The food looked alien. The room began to spin. I am going to fall, I thought. I'm going to pass out, right here in front of the varsity table. I slammed the tray down on the nearest empty surface. It made a loud clatter, but I didn't care, and I bolted. I pushed through the double doors into the hallway, desperate for quiet, desperate for air that didn't taste like panic. I leaned against a locker, gasping, trying to force my diaphragm to work. Are you okay? I jumped. It was a classmate, a girl named Sarah, who had just walked out of the restroom. She was looking at me with mild concern. I forced the mask back on. It was automatic by now. I arranged my face into a grimace that resembled a smile. Yeah, I lied, my voice shaking slightly. It's really hot in there. Tell me about it. She laughed and walked away. But I knew. It wasn't the heat. It was the monster. From that day on, the floodgates opened. The attacks became frequent, aggressive. They ambushed me during history class when the teacher called my name. They struck in the grocery store when the line wasn't moving fast enough, and I felt trapped between the magazine rack and the candy bars. They hit me at home, sitting in front of my computer screen, watching the cursor blink, suddenly unable to draw a breath. I tried everything to fight back. I developed rituals: count to 10, drink ice water, find 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch. I tried to grip the steering wheel of my life, but the car was skidding on ice. The most terrifying escalation occurred in the spring, just 2 months before prom. We were in rehearsals for the spring play. I had a supporting role, enough lines to be significant, not enough to carry the show. I was backstage, dressed in a Sriracha period costume, listening to the dialogue on stage. Suddenly, the sensation washed over me. My legs turned into water. The darkness at the edges of my vision began to creep inward. My heart was beating so hard I was sure the microphone on stage would pick it up. I grabbed a piece of scenery, a wooden flat painted to look like a library, to keep from collapsing. My cue was coming up in 10 seconds. You can't go out there, my brain screamed. You are going to faint. You are going to vomit. Though I have to, another part of me whispered. And I did. I walked out into the blinding stage lights. I said my lines. I moved where I was supposed to move. But I wasn't there. I was floating above my body, watching a puppet perform. Out-of-body experience fueled by pure terror. When the curtain fell, everyone congratulated me. You were so poised, they said. You have such great stage presence. Behind a curtain, I had sunk to the floor, trembling so hard my teeth chattered. These episodes were no longer accidents. They were a system. I learned to hide them like a shameful secret. a contraband item I carried in my pocket. But as graduation approached, a new fear took root. Prom. I tried to visualize the night. I tried to picture the dancing and the fun, but my mind kept replaying a different movie. I saw myself standing in the group photo, the flash going off, and my legs giving out. I imagined the ambulance coming. I imagined the whispers. "Did you see Jessica? She went crazy." These invasive thoughts haunted me. They were nightmares I had while I was wide awake. That was the turning point. The realization that my anxiety wasn't just a mood, it was a cage, and the door was locking. I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, yet I felt I had no other choice. I clung to a fragile hope. Maybe prom would be different. Maybe the magic of the night would cure me. I was so wrong. Prom night arrived with the weight of an inevitable collision. The entire town seemed to vibrate with it. The humid Ohio air hung heavy over us. The school gymnasium, usually a place of sweat and squeaking sneakers, had been aggressively decorated. Streamers in silver and blue twisted from the rafters, balloons clustered in corners like chemically colored grapes. A massive banner, Class of 2023, spanned the back wall, a declaration of our collective achievement. I arrived with a group of friends. We poured out of the car, a cloud of perfume and hairspray. I was smiling, I was laughing, I was performing. But inside, the gears were already grinding. My heart rate was sitting at a steady, uncomfortable thrum, like a car idling in too high a gear. My palms were damp, threatening to stain the delicate fabric of my dress. "You look absolutely stunning, Jess," Kate said. She was my best friend, her eyes shining with genuine excitement as she adjusted a strap on my shoulder. I looked at her and nodded. "Thanks, you too," I said. My voice sounded thin to my own ears. Inside, I was thinking, what if I ruin your night, Kate? What if I fall apart right now? We entered the gym. The sensory assault was instant. The heat hit me first. Body heat, trapped and amplified. Then the noise, a wall of sound. Laughter, shouting, and the bass of the DJ speakers thumping against my sternum, syncing with my frantic heart. I tried to breathe. Deep belly breaths, like the internet articles said, but the air was too thick, recycled through hundreds of lungs. The photographer was the ringmaster of this circus. He was moving through the crowd, shouting directions, organizing the chaos into tidy, printable squares. I knew what was coming. The group photo. The mandatory evidence of our happiness. "All right, everyone, big group, over here," he bellowed, waving his arms. "Let's get the whole crew." I was swept up in the tide. Bodies pressed against me from all sides, shoulders, elbows, hips. The smell of sweat, mixed with expensive perfume, was nauseating. I ended up near the center. There was no escape. "Squeeze in! Heiter! We need everyone in the frame!" The walls of the gym seemed to bend inward. The ceiling felt like it was lowering. My heart was no longer beating. It was convulsing. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, a whooshing sound that drowned out the music. My hands were shaking violently now. I clenched them into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms. "Big smiles!" the photographer yelled. He raised the camera. The lens looked like a giant, unblinking eye. And that was the moment the dam broke. The panic didn't just rise, it detonated. It felt as if someone had injected ice water into my veins. The room tilted. I felt a primal, animalistic urge to flee. It wasn't a thought, it was an instinct. Get out or die. I heard a voice next to me, distant and warped, like it was coming from underwater. "Jess? Are you okay?" I couldn't speak. My tongue was heavy, swollen in my mouth. I felt like I was suffocating in plain sight. I took a step back, then another. I bumped into someone behind me. "Hey, watch it," a voice snapped. I didn't apologize. I couldn't. The crowd felt like a cage of flesh. I needed space. I needed silence. I turned and began to push my way out. "Excuse me," I gasped, though no sound came out. I shoved past dancing couples. I dodged a table full of punch bowls. The lights were too bright, flashing red and blue, disorienting me. Every second felt like an hour. I reached the double doors at the far end of the gym. I knew that if I stayed for one more heartbeat, I would scream. I would collapse. I would become the spectacle I feared most. I threw my weight against the crash bar. The door flew open. I stumbled into the hallway. The heavy door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the roar of the music, muffling it to a dull throb. I was out. But the panic didn't stop. It was raging inside me, a fire that had consumed the house. I leaned against the cool cinder block wall, gasping, choking on air. "Why?" I screamed internally. "Why can't I be like them? Why can't I just stand there and smile? Why am I broken?" In that desolate hallway, I realized the truth. Prom wasn't a celebration. It was a battle, and I had just surrendered. I stood in the corridor, my spine pressed against the unforgiving coolness of the painted concrete. My body was betraying me in every possible way. My chest heaved with erratic, jagged breaths, as if I were trying to inhale through a wet cloth. My vision was spotty, dancing with phantom lights. "I can't go back in there," the thought looped in my mind. "I can never go back in there. I don't belong with them." The music from the gym was a muffled vibration now, a rhythmic thud, thud, thud that shook the floor beneath my heels. It sounded like a heartbeat, a giant indifferent heartbeat that continued whether I was there or not. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing the darkness inside my head would settle, but the adrenaline was spiking, surging through me in electric waves. I flashed back to that morning. I remembered standing in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom. The blue dress had looked perfect. My hair was pinned up in an intricate style that had taken an hour to perfect. I had looked at that girl in the mirror and whispered, "You've got this. You're going to be normal tonight." But standing here, sweating and trembling in an empty hallway, I knew that girl in the mirror had been a liar. I wasn't normal. I was a fraud. I pushed myself off the wall. The click-clack of my heels on the linoleum echoed sharply, sounding like gunshots in the quiet hall. I was terrified a teacher or a janitor would come around the corner and see me, see the mascara running, the terror in my eyes. I couldn't bear to be witnessed. I needed to get out. Completely out. I moved toward the exit doors at the end of the hall. I pushed through them and stepped out into the night. The change was instant. The air outside was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the stifling humidity of the gym. The sky was a vast velvet dome scattered with stars, indifferent and beautiful. The parking lot was filled with cars, some decorated with class of 23 window paint that looked grey in the moonlight. I collapsed onto the concrete steps of the school entrance. I wrapped my arms around my knees, burying my face in the fabric of my dress. I tried to regulate my breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. But the panic was a wild animal, refusing to be tamed. "Why can't I just be normal?" I whispered to the empty asphalt. The words tasted like ash. I felt the tears come then, hot, stinging tears of frustration and shame. I tried to wipe them away, angry at myself for crying, which only made me cry harder. Then, the sound of a door opening behind me. I froze. My stomach dropped. Please don't be a classmate. Please don't be Kate. I couldn't handle the pity. I couldn't handle the questions. I didn't turn around. I wiped my face frantically. "Jess." The voice was tentative, quiet. It was Tom, my younger brother. He was 14, gangly, wearing a hoodie that was too big for him. He had come with our parents to drop something off. Or maybe just to watch the spectacle from the sidelines. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at me. He didn't look horrified. He didn't look embarrassed. He just looked present. "Are you okay?" he asked, stepping closer. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say, "Yes, just getting some air." But I had no energy left for lies. I shook my head, the tears spilling over again. Tom didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't ask why I wasn't dancing. He simply sat down on the step next to me. He left a little space, respectful of my bubble, but close enough that I could feel his warmth. He sighed, looking out at the parking lot. "You know," he said after a long silence, "I always thought you were cool, even when you're freaking out." I looked at him, startled. "I'm not cool, Tom. I'm a mess. I can't even take a picture." He shrugged, kicking a pebble with his sneaker. "I don't care about the picture. I'm proud of you anyway." Those words, simple, unadorned, honest, hit me harder than the panic. I looked at his profile in the moonlight. He wasn't judging me. He wasn't expecting me to be the perfect Jessica. He saw the crack in the armor, and he didn't look away. And in that moment, the vice grip around my chest loosened. Just a fraction, but enough. I took a breath, a real one. The cool night air filled my lungs. I sat there with my little brother, while the party raged on inside without me. And for the first time all night, the world stopped spinning. This was the climax, not a triumphant return to the dance floor, but a quiet moment on a concrete step, where I realized that I didn't need to be in the photograph to be worth something. We stayed there on the steps for a long time. The music was just a dull thrumming in the background now, irrelevant. The real world was here, the chirping of crickets, the distant sound of a car passing on the highway, the rough texture of the concrete under my satin dress. My hands were still trembling, but the violent shaking had subsided into a low-grade vibration. Tom's presence was an anchor. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't tell me to cheer up. He just sat there, bearing witness. "You look like the world just ended," he said softly, breaking the silence. I let out a wet, ragged laugh. "It feels like it did." He nodded, accepting this. He didn't laugh. "You know, Jess," he continued, staring at her sneakers, "I always thought you were invincible. You get straight A's, you run everything. Mum and Dad always talk about how strong you are. But seeing you now, I get it. It's hard." I turned to look at him. My 14-year-old brother, who usually only cared about video games and snacks, was offering me more empathy than I had given myself in years. "I'm not strong," I whispered, the confession tumbling out. "I'm scared all the time, Tom. Every day. I'm terrified that people will see through me. I feel like I'm faking everything." Tom shrugged his shoulders again, that casual teenage gesture that somehow carried profound wisdom. "So what? Maybe you don't have to be strong. Maybe you can just be, Jessica." The words hung in the air. Just Jessica. I had spent so many years curating a version of myself, the academic weapon, the reliable friend, the perfect daughter, but I'd forgotten who just Jessica was. Was she allowed to be scared? Was she allowed to leave prom early? "You don't have to be in that photo," Tom said, gesturing vaguely toward the gym doors. "You don't have to smile if you don't want to. I'm going to remember you regardless. And I'd rather remember you real, sitting here, than fake smiling in there." I closed my eyes. His words were a balm on a raw wound. I realized then that the photograph, the object I had obsessed over, the proof of happiness, was just a piece of paper. It was static. It was dead. What was happening right now, this conversation, this cool air, was connection. This was alive. I didn't go back inside. I didn't wipe my face and try to salvage the night. I stayed on the steps with Tom until our parents came to pick him up. I heard the distant cheers of the prom king and queen announcement. I heard the slow song start. I heard the laughter. But I didn't feel like I was missing out anymore. I had stepped off the carousel. I lost the photograph that night. There is a gap in the yearbook where my face should be, but I gained something far heavier and more valuable. I gained the understanding that my worth is not tied to my performance. Tom looked at me as we stood up to leave. "I think," he said, "that this was your real prom, not the one in the gym, the one on the steps. Because this is where you actually showed up." I smiled at him. It wasn't a camera-ready smile. It was small, tired, and weak. But it was mine. And that was better than any picture. I often travel back in my mind to that night. I revisit the texture of the concrete steps, the vastness of the Ohio sky, the weight of my brother's hand on my shoulder. That was the night I stopped running. That was the night I finally allowed myself to be human. Not a monument to perfection, but a flawed, breathing, terrified human being. Leaving prom didn't magically cure me. That's not how mental health works. But it was the inciting incident of my recovery. I realized I could no longer live behind the mask. I couldn't wake up every morning and put on a costume of invulnerability. I started talking, first, more with Tom. Then, terrifyingly, with my parents. Eventually, I found a therapist. Sitting in that beige office, twisting a tissue in my hands, I finally gave words to the shadow. I stopped being ashamed of my panic attacks. I realized that anxiety didn't make me weak. Enduring it made me incredibly strong. It was a slow, grueling process. I had to learn how to breathe again. I had to learn how to say no. I had to learn that it is okay to leave a room if the walls start closing in. I had to learn that my limits are not failures, they are boundaries. Gradually, step by painful step, the depression and anxiety began to lose their absolute monarchy over my life. They are still there, sometimes, uninvited guests that knock on the door, but now I don't let them burn the house down. I know I am not alone. I know I have people who see the real me, the messy me, and love me anyway. Now, when people show me their prom photos, those glossy, perfect squares of smiling teenagers, I look at them with a gentle curiosity. I look at the fact. Class of 2023 group shot. I see the gap where I could have stood. And do you know what? I don't feel a shred of regret. If I had stayed, that photo would have been a lie. It would have been a document of my imprisonment. Instead, my memory of that night is the stars, the silence, the conversation with my brother, and the first deep breath of freedom. I want to leave you with this. How many times have you put on a mask to please the audience? How many times have you smiled until your face hurt, while inside you felt nothing but a howling void? How many more times are you willing to do it? My story is not a tragedy. It is a liberation. It taught me that a photograph can be empty, but a life, a messy, complicated, honest life, is never empty. If there is one thing you take from my voice today, let it be this. Do not be afraid to be real, even if it means ruining the picture. Even if it means leaving the party. Because in your truth, in your shaking hands and your honest tears, that is where your true power lies. I will never be